Oh, hello there. Yes. Well, safely ensconced to the Sabbath day. So no work for you, Christians. Indeed, it's in the Bible. You better not. Anyway, for the rest of us that are, well, just slacking, but thanking God for it, today I thought I just wanted to talk about history generically, and about history books, if you like. Yesterday, there was Toby Young posted up with the Skeptic podcast thing that he does, which, don't watch it. Anyway, yesterday it had Nigel Bigger on it, who whenever I hear that name, I just always automatically think it must be a character from a Carry On film from the 70s. Etc. Anyway, it had Nigel Bigger on, who's one of two kind of state-sponsored historians. It got me thinking about the notion, we just don't hear from historians. They are a non-thing anywhere. You never get historians on the news talking about things, okay? In right-wing circles, there are effectively two historians, okay? The first one is David Starkey, who appears, having got into a little bit of problem with the damn blacks recently, to be a man who is quite happy to say anything for money. I think it's the best way of describing him. You may well like David Starkey, and you may well like that kind of view of history whereby everybody who was a king or a queen or a princess in 1349 is vitally important, but oddly ordinary people aren't. I think history's moved on in the last 40 years. But never mind, because we learnt in history, we had one of those rulers in school with the kings and queens on it. That's the important stuff. And Nigel Bigger, who has sort of leapt forwards as the kind of go-to guy who will tell us all the great things about the British Empire, because he wrote a book very recently, which is still living off, rightly so, big sales, about the British Empire. Just to sort of quote, as it does indeed here, the decolonised narrative is hopeless naive. Yes, the British Empire was violent from time to time, but that doesn't make it immoral. The reason we could suppress slavery all over the world was that Britannia ruled the waves. Yes, indeed. Loads of people will tell me about the British ending slavery, which they did eventually in Victorian times. We basically ended slavery in terms of the British Empire about 40 years before the Americans did. I don't think most people know that. And sometimes they get rather upset when you actually point out the dates. But hey, that's just facts, which don't care about anyone's feelings, least of all mine. But anyway, Nigel, who wrote his book very deliberately as a polemic, and I'm going to use that word very precisely, to rebut the decolonisers of the curriculum and all that kind of thing. I'm going to post links down below. You can have a look at some of the book reviews. It was mixed, to say the least. Even the Daily Telegraph, which gave it 5 stars, says that he stretches a point because he is making a point. It's a polemic, and it isn't realistically a history. It isn't things being weighed up. It is making a point. Anyway, the point of what I was going to do today was suggest some things that you can read on a wider level, just simply because there is so much of history that people know nothing about, or they imagine that they know things about it, and they just don't. So, here's my top few tips, okay? First of all, Modern Ireland by Forrester, okay, which is the go-to book to see why it is that we ended up with a civil war in the north for 30 years. Remember that? Everyone keeps forgetting about it. Do you remember that? When the Irish were the scum swilling around London, the ones that couldn't be trusted and had to be seriously repressed by Oliver Cromwell and people ever since. Yes, really interesting book because it's a hidden history, okay? It's over there. I mean, how many times do you whenever people think about Britain, Northern Ireland is always the afterthought, and yet so much of our history contains Irish elements in it, and indeed so much of our railway cuttings contain Irish elements in it. Anyway, moving on, yes. If you just want classic populist stuff, Hobsbawm. My particular favourite is The Age of Revolution, which is the last of a number of books he did on basically the history of industrial Britain. All of them are extremely worthwhile because they present history from that kind of 1960s E.P. Thompson view of the ordinary person. Not the sort of thing that David Starkey would be into. If you want to know about British foreign policy, line in the sand. Yes. Ever wonder why those nations always seem to have such straight borders? Well, because we divided up the place between ourselves and the French to a certain extent, and the book here, James Barr, does go into that enormously well. Yes. So much inter-ethnic conflict that we are still living with today, and a lot of it is to do with the British Empire. Whoops, don't tell Mr. Bigger. Right, moving on to a bit more modern history. I can wholeheartedly, even though it's from a right-wing perspective, recommend 6 Months in 1945. Yes, Michael Dobbs got rave reviews, particularly by the Daily Mail when it came out, but it's just really, really interesting to see that precise period when the Second World War was ending, because, as I often say in my videos here, a lot of people are completely unaware of the immediate post-war history of Europe and why Poland is where it is and why there are no Germans in Gdansk. Used to be a lot. Anyway, moving on from that and to the more sort of serious stuff which you need a strong stomach for. Bloodlands, Timothy Snyder. If you want a vastly comprehensive view of the horrors of totalitarian regimes, Adolf Hitler and Stalin, just to make that really clear, as well as some of the other nasty bits that are going on there and the current nasty regime, for example, in Hungary and the roots that there are. It's well worth reading that one because it's not an easy read about what happened only about 100 years ago, and we seem to be heading back to similar territory. It scares me somewhat because you can't read that book without staring at the ceiling at night to a certain extent. Similarly, wholeheartedly recommend Savage Continent, which is Keith Lowe's book on, again, the aftermath of the Second World War, and about the way that people had to move around a great deal. Gdansk and other things. Okay, moving on to an American sphere. In particular, I would wholeheartedly recommend Nancy's Democracy and Change. Nancy MacLean just goes into the influence of American money, which is very, 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 very prevalent in British politics. Ask Lord Young's boy, Toby Young, about that. No, don't. He'll get cross about it. If you want a astoundingly good history of capitalism, Empire of Cotton by Beckett, which just traces that one commodity of cotton and the enormous influence it had on British Empire, the American Empire, and current world production of clothes. It's just a fascinating read. Not the sort of thing that you'll ever hear about from David Starkey, but just absolutely stunning. If you want Capitalism 101, that really gives it to you. Broader on human history, you have to go for Graeber's Dawn of Everything, which presents us with an anthropological view, albeit an anarchistic one, of human society at the dawn of agriculture, because we tend to be presented as a very right-wing view that societies naturally have kings and billionaires, but they don't, I'm afraid. And 2 for 1ers, okay, Lineberg. Anything you can read by Lineberg, get a chance to see him online. This is superb Magna Carta Manifesto, which is about the commons and what we've lost. It's kept my brain busy for about 8 or 9 months now. And I've already said about some of his other books, but I would also point you to The London Hanged, which is a great social history of London in the 17th and 18th century. So whenever you get told about crime in London, you can point to that book and say, no, mate, it's really safe. Yeah, really interesting, especially about ethnic minority people who apparently were around before Windrush. Astounding, isn't it, eh? And just to prove that I'm not entirely a bloke, well, I am pretty much a bloke, but if you want a couple of sort of decent reads which are fiction, but tell you a lot about history, I can seriously recommend. Just finally got a new copy of it today. Tim Lott's Rumours of a Hurricane, which is about a print worker in the 1980s and Thatcherism. It's a very balanced view of the pros and cons of Thatcherism. There you go, you see. I might be a lefty, but I'm entirely capable of being rational. Absolutely superb book. If you live through it, you can see why. I love those kind of books that you can immerse yourself in the time. And if you want to look at the horrors of a totalitarian regime, in this case a communist one, Stasiland. Great short stories by Anne Funder, which will give you a really clear insight as to just how appalling that particular regime and a lot of the other ones in Eastern Europe were. Yes, anyway, if you want to, you can watch Nigel Bigger, but I recommend just reading something and thinking about things for yourself, because why bother letting other people tell you what your opinions are? Unless, of course, you want to send £25 to Nigel Farage for that. Yes. Don't. Anyway, do have a lovely Sunday. Enjoy church or the mosque or the synagogue or the temple, I suppose. Or maybe just pray at home. Or don't. There you go. I'm an equal opportunities theist. Enjoy.